Unit 16. Fast forward. So, how did our cookies turn out? Hello, manager. This is Victor Marromo, strategic planning and performance management coach and consultant. We've reached Unit 16 of our wonderful story about our CMS with the coach and facilitator Sonia and our great L&D manager Beb. Some months have passed since that meeting with Sonia. It wasn't our last meeting with her, and from time to time we still check in. Sonia continues to serve as facilitator for the group we sat with back when we knew nothing about Communities of Model Success (CMS). In addition to that, she has taken on another role as developmental mentor to other facilitators of similar groups. I wouldn't say that CMS have become a movement at Money Pump, but there are now 15 groups in one stage or another of development, and interest has been expressed elsewhere. Most of the senior management members are aware that CMS process has begun and is gaining popularity. Wisely, they are treating CMS as an emerging process and allowing it to grow on its own merit. As a company, Money Pump was already doing well, and the benefits of the CMS groups are being treated like found money. No one has expressed any intent or interest in attempting to manage CMS like a program, and we are all grateful for that. Our experience has taught us that the power of the CMS groups comes from their voluntary, organic nature. Since members of these groups are operating primarily from a discretionary posture, we are beginning to see just how much energy can be harnessed by tapping the lateral capacity that is revealed when self-interest can be unleashed in a healthy way. Now, don't think that our process has been a bed of roses. All three of us, Carlin, Cheryl, and myself, set out to establish a CMS in our area, or department, or business unit. Given our varying personalities, each of us took a somewhat different path to getting our groups up and running. Carlin, our driver and result producer, initially could not overcome her controlling nature and quickly created her group. Enrolled her lateral managers and put her team in place. The obvious problem, of course, was that everything was her idea, and nobody showed up owning anything. Members attended the meetings because nobody wanted to get crosswise with Caroline. After about 4 months, the group ground to a halt when 5 of the 9 members called the day of their session claiming a need to be elsewhere. Caroline was disappointed, but she is also a fast learner. She is now 3 months into our start with a much more voluntary and organic feel. The group has gained some traction, and progress is not as quick as Caroline would prefer. She is pacing herself with lots of deep breathing and time spent on other projects. Cheryl, on the other hand, ran into different kinds of issues. She is one to suggest things to her managers and hope they pick up the thread of the opportunity. She received some sparks of interest, mainly from individual managers taking the initiative to cross functional lines, but no group was formed, and she has now called on Sonia to coach her in getting the message across to her managers. My experience has been quite different, largely, I think, because I took a more methodical approach. But then, that's me, methodical to the bitter end. So let me tell you about my initial foray into CMS sponsorship. So, let me tell you about my initial foray into CMS sponsorship. 1. I started by talking with the managers who reported to me. The initial discussion centered around where we were disappointed with the service we were providing to the end customer. Once we identified areas of our own dissatisfaction, I asked what, if anything, we could do to improve the service. The answers that came back were varied, but to summarize, my managers came to the conclusion I expected. There were things we could do, but only so much since there were other functions involved in providing the service as it finally appeared to the customer. 2. I asked whether we had done anything to engage the other functional areas in our interest to improve the level of service we were providing. As I expected, the answer was yes. While a similar level of commitment was expressed by our colleagues in the participation functions, the results over time had been less than spectacular. When I asked my managers for their view on why their commitment and the commitment of their counterparts in the other functions were not what was hoped for, their response ranged from personality assessments to competing priorities to competency critiques and much more. In the end, there was no single view that prevailed, and together we conclude that we truly did not know why we continued to provide less than the service we were committed to. As you are hearing this, you may begin to lose patience with the pace I am reporting. Just now that I fully anticipated that, and want to make a moment to point out that the impatience you are experiencing is the biggest threat to any CMS process being successful. Remember Beb's drawing from earlier in our story, the theory of outcomes in organizations. While it may not be immediately apparent, what I was doing at this point with my managers was laying the foundation and identifying connections. I walked them into a realization that their connections with their counterparts might not be set up for them to succeed. During these discussions, it became apparent that my managers were relying on a strategy of everyone doing their part. Since their counterparts knew their functional areas best, they would decide on the actions that would realize the improvements. My managers report that, in some cases, the actions promised by the counterparts were completed without appreciable service improvement, and in others they found that actions promised got subordinated by demands from their higher ups. 3. When I finally asked my managers if they felt they were set up to succeed in their collaborative efforts, they sheepishly admitted that they felt constrained and were embarrassed that they had not seen this fact for themselves. I quickly assured that no blame was intended. The discussion I engaged with them was exactly like the one I thought they needed to have with their counterparts. I went on to ask if they were interested in possibly altering the connection with their counterparts, and each of them said yes, despite having some skepticism. 4. Once we passed through this gateway, them acknowledging both their interests and willingness to pursue the service improvement, I gave them some idea of how a CMS worked and what I had seen with my own eyes. I cannot say that they jumped for joy at what I described, but they did admit that the time involved was not too demanding and that the time they were currently spending was not producing the result. So why not give it a try? That admission was all I needed to get rolling. From this conversation, I proceeded to meet with my counterparts in the service delivery process and shared my vision of what was possible. Again, there was some expression of skepticism, but also an acknowledgement of a shared sense of frustration at our seemingly inability to affect our service levels despite repeated attempts with some pretty capable people. So we began. In my mind, while my approach is methodical, my commitment is fierce, and I saw this project as laying the foundation for an entirely new way of doing day-to-day business, not only for my area, but for Money Pump Company. So I wasn't going to take any chances. I pitched Sonia hard, and she accepted my request to be directly involved. She did have some stipulations. Sonia insisted on taking the learning from the other CMS and bringing that to my group early on so they did not need to reinvent methods that have been previously successful in other groups. That request received my full approval, provided that Sonia presented those ideas as options, not direct instructions. She agreed. Since I was a primary sponsor of the CMS approach, my counterparts asked me to hold conversations with their reports as well. As with my reports, the light went on slowly, but eventually it began to shine brightly and people committed to participate. With Sonia, I agreed that we would have not give the CMS project a big launch. All these managers had seen the big project launch in the past. In their minds, it signified something we did not want to promote. The idea that the CMS was like a project and it had a beginning, middle, and an end. We wanted the participating managers to discover the practice nature of the CMS themselves, and we also wanted the continuation of the group, following initial successes, to be their idea. Back to Sony's stipulations, one of the primary discoveries that Sony had made with her other CMS groups was that everyone was participating, had many competing commitments and centers of gravity that influenced their actions. Unless there were some principles put in place, even simple guidelines, the boundaries of the CMS would be hard to hold, and the practice would be attacked by outside forces and eventually defeated. These attacks would not be malicious, they would be simply the environmental factors to be accounted for in order to sustain the CMS identity. The very first gathering our CMS, Sona suggested to the group that they adopt the following guidelines developed by earlier CMS groups, with understanding that they would take a while to appreciate fully. Here's what she showed them. Let's review some guidelines for sustaining a CMS using enlightened self-interest to stay sane, productive, and amused as we work together. Number 1. Show up. Attendance is critical. Group performance depends on participation. 2. Whoever sees it first gets to do it. 3. Nobody likes anybody's ideas better than their own. Everyone wants to play. They will play your game if they can play their way. Let them. 4. Organizational life will provide as much nonsense as you can deal with. Do not contribute to more chaos. 5. Do not confuse your beliefs with the truth. It makes you stupid and an annoyance to other people. 6. Where you have no control, you must communicate. When you do not communicate, apologize. When someone fails to communicate with you, forgive. 7. If you only need to share information, email is great. If you need to communicate, pick up the phone or walk down the hall. Communication is a process inside a relationship, inside a context, not a transaction. And this is a very important point. 8. Give up your right to say, I told you so. If you don't say it when you first see it, forget it and get to work. 9. We are all as individuals in over our heads. That's just the way it is. 10. Keep your expectations consistent with only what has been promised. Anything else you get is a bonus, and you have no basis for ever expecting to get it again. 11. Limit your opinions to only those things to which you are truly committed and prepared to take action on. 12. Toughen up. Life is a contact sport anyway. Organizational life is worse. 13. Get curious. Stay curious. Make your own research. Contribute to the CMS models. Give your ideas. 14. Give your gifts willingly. If you know more about sales management, then talk about it. If you know more about clients and customer service, talk about it. Or bring someone who can talk a little bit about it. Lead some presentation. 15. Remember, if you can't laugh at yourself, someone else will always be happy to do it for you.